Hi everyone, welcome. I'm preparing to check in on this system over here that's out on the bench already. This is my system of mixed red worms, and it's a system that's been in service now for 42 weeks. That's 294 days. So before we get started, I thought I'd share some information with you. Some of it's the sort of routine information that I share on a regular basis. It's been 12 days since we last checked in. The system's been fed 24 times so far. Feeding number 25 today is going to consist of carrot peels and some cabbage, maybe some soiled paper towels and stuff like that. And over the past 3 months, we've been really working hard to try to reduce springtails in here. We've gone down the road of trying to apply diatomaceous earth. That's what the DE stands for there. We've tried neem oil, neem cake. We've tried more recently over the past few check-ins to try steer the system towards a little bit of drying. So we removed plastic coverings and we've left only paper coverings here. But I got some feedback from one of the viewers who commented on one of my recent videos that, and this is somebody who evidently raises springtails, possibly to feed to one of their pets or something like that. I forget what the reason was or if they even gave it, but quick shout out and thank you to the Duke of Foxborough, who provided me some input after they did a little bit of research on springtails, suggesting that the system here might be dominant or dominated by a type of microorganism which the springtails really like, basically a more fungal dominant sort of environment going on here. And I guess when you're running a worm bin, you do often think of what the worms rely on as being just a mix of different types of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi. And it was suggested that if you're always applying stuff that really promotes a more fungal type dominated environment, stuff such as leaves, fruits, coffee mushrooms, grain type things, if you got a worm bin, you ever fed those things, you'll know that those things have a tendency to grow mold. And those are the exact things that springtails evidently thrive on. So I think we're going to pull away from the most recent effort here, which was to try drying the system to try to reduce springtail numbers. And we're going to try to steer the system towards a more bacterial dominant versus fungal dominant space, which will theoretically, hopefully, help us reduce the number of springtails in this system. So yeah, I mean, past 3 months, coming in here, try after try, noticing just way too many springtails living in here. And, well, 12 days have passed since our last check-in, so who knows what we're going to encounter here. Perhaps the drying effort might have helped a little bit. But basically, I'm giving them their feeding today, which was specifically selected to be materials that are hopefully going to limit the amount of fungal growth and hopefully promote a more bacteria dominant environment in this bin. So right away as I pull back, you can see how all these little white specks that you see everywhere. And it doesn't seem to matter whether it's over here where the feeding zone has been applied or even over here on the far end where there's been no feedings at all. We've been kind of running sort of a wedge environment where the feedings have been getting fed over there and the finished stuff has been getting pushed over to this side. So any time we would come in here to explore how things are doing, we would, whoa, look at all those worms. We would see lots and lots of springtails, not just near the surface, but even down low as we would excavate, we would find them in little pockets of material here and there. I'm definitely still seeing more than I would normally see in any of my systems. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not against springtails. I'm just against anything that sort of starts to go haywire. Because I do want to maintain balance and I don't want to have any sort of outbreaks of anything in any of my systems. So I'm all for allowing the springtails to remain as long as they're not sort of taking over. So I've gotten lots of feedback from lots of people that are always asking, what do you got against springtails? Da, da, da. I don't have anything against springtails. I'm all about springtails and other helper creatures in my worm bins being there to aid in the breakdown of the materials I put into the system to keep my little wormies company. So my only goal here is to get their numbers under control, not to somehow eliminate them or do away with them. So don't get me wrong, please. It's not my aim to try to kill every last springtail in here. All I'd really like to do in here is just to create an environment where they don't feel quite as comfortable, where they don't mate and reproduce and take over the way you see here, you know, just so many springtails everywhere. All these little tiny white specks, presumably they're coming across on the video. It is kind of nice to see how many worms live in this system. Because when the system originally started out, the population was thought to be quite minimal. I can't remember, but I've said it so many times over and over, so I'll correct myself with a little on-screen note if I'm mistaken. But I believe when we first started out this worm population, they were just coming out of a sort of major die-off problem, and I managed to rescue a certain small number of them. I believe just maybe 3 dozen were used to launch off this population, and at that time they lived in a much smaller container. And then after a certain amount of time, after it seemed like their population had bounced back and they had reestablished themselves with a decent number of worms, it seemed like they were starting to get a little bit crowded in that small box that they were living in, at which time they got moved into this container here to give them a little bit more room to roam around and be comfortable in. And by giving them more space, my presumption is that that might have also promoted some additional mating and breeding and expansion of their numbers. And as you can see, there is a good number of worms living in here, as well as a good number of springtails too. So I am just sort of gradually nudging things over, as I've been doing in this system, taking the more finished material, stacking it up a little bit higher on this edge of the bin, and we're going to leave ourselves a little bit of space on the opposite end, which is where the feedings have been getting applied to drop in today's food. I wanted to make sure that by leaving this system uncovered, well, not uncovered, but with the removal of the plastic coverings, I wanted to make sure that we didn't really undergo some sort of flash drying, which might have caused the system to become somewhat uncomfortable for the worms, and I don't think that that's the case here at all. The system's holding up pretty good. It wasn't just left uncovered, you know, so you saw how it was when we first arrived. There was a 2 pieces of paper, a newspaper covering the entire surface, as well as a somewhat smaller piece of paper bag covering that. And then even over the feeding area, we had that coffee filter covering the spot where we last fed, just to mark which end of the bin is the feeding zone versus which is the end that's been used to just store the finished castings. And it is quite interesting how over on the finished castings end of the bin, how many worms like being in there. Kind of makes me wonder why. You'd always think that it's the end of the bin where we've been feeding regularly that would have the greatest number of worms in it, and it might, because we're only just getting there now to see how things are progressing. And yeah, there's a good number of worms down here where we last fed, and as you can see, there's a good number of springtails mixed in with the worms too throughout the material. The stuff we're seeing here is the skin of potato, because potato was what was thrown in here last time to feed them, and they've managed to nibble all the nice, yummy, starchy goodness off the potato peels, leaving only the skins at this point. And they'll break it all down in time, but I guess over 12 days they just haven't really done away with all of it yet. What a nice bin, I gotta say. If it wasn't for all the springtails, and once again, don't get me wrong, I don't really have anything against the springtails, it's just seeing them in such great numbers is what kind of freaks me out a little bit. So yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for all the springtails, I would almost consider this to be like an ideal example of how a worm bin should look and feel, as far as worm population, quite comfortable to be pretty much in all areas of the bin. Moisture level seeming to be quite nice. The consistency of the material throughout is so nice too, just the way it all crumbles and flakes away no matter what part of it I'm examining. So I'm definitely pleased to see how things in this system are looking. A couple of my systems have started exhibiting signs of perhaps a little bit too much moisture going on. Now that we're getting into the warm months and my furnace isn't running anymore, it's my forced hot air heating system here in the house that I contribute a lot of the dry winter air to. And now that the heater's not working, well, I mean, once in a while on a cooler evening I'll hear the heater kick on. But for the most part, it's been warm enough to not require heat to be running here in my house, and I've not I've not really started running any air conditioning. Not that I run much air conditioning here in the first place, but air conditioning also has the tendency to dry air out. So on the rare occasion that I run air conditioning, it's really just upstairs, so it wouldn't even affect the air quality down here in the basement where I keep my worm bins. Down here, basically, whatever humidity level is going on outside is probably representative of what the humidity level down here in my basement is. So we've gone pretty thoroughly through the entire system, and we're going to apply today's food with a little bit of extra bedding, I suppose. I guess we'll start in with just some of these soiled pieces of paper towel and napkin that we can place the foods in on top of. What do we have here? Okay. It's sort of a little landing pad for the foods to come in on top of. Here we've got some of the outer, less nice looking leaves of the head of cabbage, as well as some of the bits of the stem over here going in. So that's stuff that they're probably going to enjoy. This stuff, since it was frozen, I'm assuming is going to become nice and soft as it thaws. Might even release a little bit of moisture down onto that dry paper. And on top of that is going to go all this nice, yummy, sweet carrot. And I'm pretty sure that these types of foods that we're adding are going to promote minimal fungal growth, hopefully promoting nice bacterial growth down here in the feeding area. And I've got my prepared bedding, which does have leaves in it, but very limited amount of leaves relative to the material that makes up the majority of what this stuff is made of. The majority of what it's made up of is shredded paper and cardboard, and I just throw the leaves in there for good measure. So I know one of the no-nos listed on my little green board was leaves. Leaves being one of those things that also does sort of promote a certain amount of fungal dominance. But I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'm just going to kind of hope for the best and assume that what we're doing here is going to provide the worm bin with a limited supply of the type of things that the springtails appear to thrive on. And hopefully over time they'll continue whittling down the supply of that stuff. And I'll just be trying to gear the next few check-ins and feedings to try to limit the sort of stuff that will promote a fungal type dominated environment, and hopefully as a result help us start seeing a little bit of a reduction in the springtail numbers in here. So I'm just going to evict this little baby worm off my glove. I think I saw another one there, and here's another one. And then I believe we're in a position to start covering up here. So I really do appreciate the feedback and the input. That is really how my whole channel here got started in the first place, was me getting into the whole worm farming game without a lick of knowledge, and then really turning to the audience to feed me input on what I was doing right, what I was doing wrong, and try to steer me towards better outcomes, and I really hope that what I got here is going to do that for us as far as the springtails go. So that's it for today's check-in with our now almost 300-day-old red worm bin, 294 days, 42 weeks. And I don't know, I guess I'm always very curious to see how things are doing in here, but I resist the urge to come back. So we'll probably come back in another 10, 12, who knows how many days, to see how things are going. But until then, hopefully we've done the right thing to steer things in the right direction. Keeping my fingers crossed. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.